She is nothing but an expired ATM. After the wedding, she will never stand in our way again. One glass of wine is enough." The words drifted through the thin crack of the restroom door as I stood frozen inside one of the stalls. I had excused myself only to freshen up, yet fate led me here, hearing what was never meant for my ears. Mary's voice, hushed but clear, twined with her mother's reply, their laughter sharp, cruel, hidden beneath the echo of running water. My fingers clenched against the marble wall, pulse racing as I pressed my lips together to keep from gasping aloud. For a moment, I let the chill of that tiled room steady me. Then I flushed, smoothed my dress, and walked out with the mask of calm dignity. Back at the dinner hall, chandeliers glowed golden, roses spilled their fragrance across the tables, and guests raised their glasses with carefree joy. My son's smile radiated across the room, proud and unsuspecting. I slid back into my chair, lifted my glass, and matched the laughter around me. No one noticed the stiffness in my fingers, the tightness in my chest. To them, I was the serene mother, savoring her son's happiness. Only I knew that beneath the sweet music of the evening, I had just overheard a sentence on my life. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be a night of joy, a celebration where two families joined together before the vows were spoken. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, every table dressed with white roses and silver cutlery. Waiters moved gracefully between the guests, refilling glasses and carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. My son laughed easily with his friends, his hand never far from Mary's, as if she were the light of his life. To the guests, it was a picture of harmony, an evening where love and wealth blended into one perfect portrait. I smiled as I raised my glass, tilting my head in polite acknowledgement whenever someone caught my eye. No one suspected the storm that raged beneath my calm surface. Inside, my hand clutched the glass so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The crystal trembled, though I forced it still, willing myself to remain composed. The words I had overheard in the restroom echoed again, each syllable slicing into me. Expired ATM. Not only humiliation, but a threat as well. My life had been reduced to an obstacle, a problem to be erased. The red wine shimmered under the light, its dark surface rippling as if mocking me, like a pool of blood waiting to spill. I breathed slowly, keeping my face smooth, but every swallow burned, every smile felt like a blade against my throat. Around me, laughter rose higher, glasses clinked in cheer, yet all I heard was the whisper that promised my end. I lifted my chin and caught my reflection in the tall mirror across the ballroom. For a fleeting moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the image of a fragile widow, meek and disposable. In her place stood someone hardened, a figure of quiet strength cloaked in dignity. My gown shimmered under the soft lights, but it was the eyes that told the truth. They no longer carried sorrow, they burned with resolve. I inhaled deeply, letting the laughter of the guests wash over me like distant noise, and allowed a small, deliberate smile to form on my lips. I had been underestimated for far too long, pushed into the shadows as if my years meant weakness. Yet those same years had sharpened me, taught me when to endure and when to strike. Inside, the promise formed like steel. They thought of me as an expired ATM, a relic to be discarded, but they had no idea what storm I was capable of unleashing. I lowered my glass slowly, savoring the weight of the moment, and whispered in my thoughts the words that would become my shield. They think I am useless, past my time. But in this cold-blooded game, the one who smiles last will be me. I have lived 60 years, and though widowhood marked me early, it also carved resilience into my bones. When my husband passed, he left me more than memories. The mansion, worth $30 million, rose on the coast like a monument to his legacy. Its marble halls and sweeping terraces were not merely stone and glass. They carried the weight of our family's honor. Beyond it, other assets rested inside a dynasty trust, locked away with clauses designed to preserve wealth for generations yet unborn. Nothing could be squandered. Nothing could be touched without purpose. That trust was his way of ensuring our name would endure long after both of us were gone. To the outside world, I appeared calm, gracious, a woman blessed with quiet luxury. But within, I remained watchful. I understood too well that vast wealth attracts not only admiration, but envy. I had seen smiles turn brittle when money was mentioned, had watched relatives weigh loyalty against greed. So I walked my days with a certain stillness, holding my composure like a shield. The house was filled with light and art, yet I never let myself forget that every fortune draws shadows. I carried the responsibility not only to protect the assets, but to guard the spirit behind them, the vision my husband trusted me to keep alive. That knowledge steadied me, but it also warned me. Wealth is both armor and invitation, and I was old enough to know danger often hides behind a smile. My son Jack was 35, and to me he was still the gentle boy who once followed me through the garden, asking endless questions about the world. He had grown into a kind man, mild in nature, respectful to everyone he met, but inexperienced in matters of the heart. For years he buried himself in work, in books, in the quiet routines of a life without turbulence. He had never truly fallen in love, never faced the sharp edges that passion often carries. So when someone finally stirred his heart, I knew he would surrender completely. That was Jack's greatest weakness. His loyalty, once given, was absolute, and his trust almost childlike. He believed the best in people, especially women who knew how to touch his loneliness with soft words and gentle hands. I worried about that, even when he smiled and brushed away my concerns. In the glow of his affection, he seemed blind to the shadows that lingered behind charm. With me, Jack remained dutiful, often seeking my advice, listening with patience. He kissed my cheek every time he left the house, a habit that never faded. Yet I began to sense the shift when another voice entered his world. A mother's bond is strong, but I felt how easily influence could slip between us, how quickly devotion could bend under the weight of desire. I loved him too much not to see it, and though I smiled at his happiness, inside I feared what that innocence might cost him. Mary entered our lives like a vision crafted to charm. She came from a family that had risen quickly in wealth, the kind people call new money, impressive in numbers, but lacking the deep roots of tradition or refinement. Yet Mary knew how to polish every surface. With striking beauty and a talent for style, she dressed in muted tones, wore tailored cuts, and adorned herself with jewelry just understated enough to mimic quiet luxury. To those who didn't look closely, she seemed born into grace, when in truth she was carefully masking the glitter of her sudden fortune. Her ambition was a flame she hid well, tucking it behind soft smiles and tender gestures. With Jack she was all warmth, every word a promise of devotion, every glance a mirror of his longing. She cooked for him, laughed at his smallest jokes, touched his arm as though no one else existed. Slowly, she wrapped him in a cocoon of trust. I watched the way his eyes followed her, the way he leaned toward her voice as if it held the air he breathed. He believed he had found love, but I recognized something beneath her sweetness, a hunger that stretched further than affection. Mary did not look at my son as her whole world. She looked at the mansion, the trust, the legacy I guarded. To her, marriage was not union, but conquest. She was not building a life with him. She was laying claim to everything he had not yet realized could be taken. Jack fell fast, faster than I had ever imagined. Within weeks he spoke of Mary as though she were the only woman who had ever existed, his eyes glowing with a devotion so complete it frightened me. Friends raised their brows, relatives exchanged knowing glances, all quietly astonished at how quickly he had been swept away. Mary knew how to play her role. In my presence she was sweetness itself, respectful, eager to please, her smile as polished as her pearls. Yet I sensed the shift whenever she leaned close to Jack in private, her words planted like seeds in his trusting mind. She painted dreams of a wedding so grand it would be remembered for decades, a celebration worth $10 million, a stage to announce their power as much as their love. And then she let another idea slip gently into his ear, dressed as practicality. Wouldn't it be fitting, she suggested, if their future began inside the family mansion, the $30 million estate that stood as a monument to legacy? To her, it was not a symbol to preserve. It was a prize to possess. Mary never asked directly. Instead, she coached Jack to speak for her. I heard her reasoning echoed in his voice, soft but insistent. "You're older now, Mom. You don't need so much space. Wouldn't it be wiser to gift it to us, the future of the family?" I smiled at him, my heart heavy. He thought he was asking for love. In truth, he was only carrying her ambition to my door. I smiled when Jack brought me the request, my lips curved in a way that reassured him, though inside my chest a cold unease had begun to spread. He spoke with such hope, his voice full of Mary's borrowed words, asking for the grand wedding and hinting at the mansion as though it were already theirs. I nodded gently, letting him believe I agreed, and he embraced me with relief. To him, my acceptance was proof of love. To me, it was a mask I had to wear. Around the table, I lifted my glass and promised to support their plans, even offering a toast to the future. Guests cheered, Jack beamed, and Mary's eyes sparkled with triumph she could not quite hide. No one noticed the way my fingers tightened just slightly on the stem of the glass, or how I inhaled slowly to steady the rush of unease inside me. My heart knew what my mouth would not yet say. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the way Mary's gaze lingered too long on the chandeliers, on the art, on the weight of wealth surrounding her. It was not affection she sought, but possession. Still, I said nothing. I chose silence, not surrender. I tucked my doubts behind a composed smile, storing them like arrows for the right moment. I nodded, but in my heart it felt like a thorn. A woman who truly loved my son would never place family honor and legacy on the bargaining table. One afternoon, I decided to visit Jack without warning, hoping to surprise him with a home-cooked meal like I used to when he was younger. The key still fit the lock, and I let myself in, carrying a small basket of food. The apartment was quiet at first, but as I stepped toward the living room, I caught the sound of Mary's voice. She was speaking on the phone, her tone sharp and hushed, her words aimed at her mother. "Once the wedding is done, we can sell the mansion. 30 million will cover the debts and leave plenty for us." My breath caught in my throat. To hear our family home, the very heart of our legacy, reduced to nothing more than a number to balance someone else's ledger, was like being struck. I stood still, hidden in the hallway, my chest tightening as if the air itself betrayed me. Before I could gather myself, Jack walked in, smiling when he saw me. I wanted to confront him, to ask if he knew what his fiancée was planning, but the words barely left my lips before he cut me off. His face hardened, and instead of doubt, I saw irritation. "Mom, you're always suspicious. You read too much into everything. Can't you just trust her for once?" His defense of Mary stung worse than the betrayal itself. I swallowed my protest, holding his gaze while my heart cracked silently inside me. Mary never missed her chance to put on the mask. In front of me, she was the very picture of sweetness, her voice soft, her smile practiced, her hands reaching to pour my tea as she called me Mom, with rehearsed warmth. Guests or relatives who watched would think we were a family already bonded, a daughter embracing her new role. I played along, nodding, returning her smile, but my eyes caught what others could not. The moment she turned away, when she thought no one was looking, her gaze shifted. Cold, sharp. A flicker of disdain passed through her face like a shadow. In that instant, I understood. To her, I was not family. I was an obstacle to be removed. Each encounter deepened my unease. Jack, blinded by love, saw only the devotion she displayed in public. He mistook her attentiveness for affection, her careful gestures for care. But I saw how her words coiled around him, how her presence pushed me further from his side. I realized with growing clarity that Mary's hunger was not limited to wealth. It was sharper, more dangerous. She held no respect for blood, no reverence for legacy. The bond between mother and son, once unshakable, began to strain. His trust in me wavered under her influence. His tone edged with impatience when I voiced concern. And there I stood, still and silent, feeling the ground shift beneath me. For the first time, I felt what it was to be utterly alone inside my own family. It was during another visit to Jack's apartment that the mask of civility began to slip. I had come with a basket of fruit, trying to keep our bond intact, though Mary hovered close by, her smile stretched too perfectly across her face. After dinner, I offered to tidy the kitchen, a small act that gave me the comfort of habit. As I tied the trash bag, something caught my eye. A slip of paper, crumpled but legible, peeked out from the pile. I smoothed it against the counter, and my breath tightened. It was a pharmacy receipt under Mary's name, listing medications I knew too well. Pills meant for the heart, for blood sugar, drugs that in the wrong hands could turn into silent weapons. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone, quickly snapping a photograph before slipping the paper back where it had been. I forced my face to remain calm when I rejoined them in the living room, smiling politely as though nothing had changed. But inside, my chest throbbed with dread. Mary knew my weaknesses. She had studied the chart of my life and targeted the fragile points. I sat across from her, nodding at her idle chatter, all the while aware that each glass of wine she offered carried the shadow of danger. The room felt smaller, the air sharper, every gesture of hers a test of my composure. I said nothing, but in silence I raised my guard higher than ever. I pieced the puzzle together in silence, every fragment sliding into place with a clarity that chilled me. Mary's smile was too polished, her kindness too carefully rehearsed, every gesture too precise, too deliberate to be genuine. With the pharmacy receipt still vivid in my mind, I finally understood the dark shape of her plan. If I were to collapse during the wedding, clutching my chest in front of 100 unsuspecting witnesses, it would appear to all as nothing more than age and frailty. A tragic heart attack, they would whisper, an accident of time and circumstance. Jack would inherit everything instantly, and Mary would wrap her fingers around the keys to the dynasty. She could dress herself in black lace at my funeral, her tears falling on cue, and no one would dare question the sincerity of her grief. I sat across from her in the living room, pouring myself a cautious half-glass of wine, pretending not to notice the sharp way her eyes followed each movement of the bottle and every sip I raised to my lips. I smiled when she spoke. I listened as though her words carried weight. I even thanked her softly for her concern, though inside my mind was sharpening itself into a blade. I would not allow her the satisfaction of seeing my fear. My silence was not weakness, and it was not surrender. It was patience, deliberate and cold. I had learned long ago that the most dangerous strike was often the quietest one, the blow no one expected until it landed. Inwardly, I repeated the vow that steadied me, like a mantra carved into my bones. They believe I am weak, easy to push aside, easy to silence. But every false smile, every whispered plot, every poisoned drop of wine will become another stone I use to bury them. The whisper I had overheard in the restroom clung to me like a shadow, and the weight of each suspicious discovery pressed heavier on my chest until I could scarcely breathe. I knew the moment for action had come. Quietly, without a word to Jack, I reached for those who could see clearly what love-blind eyes could not. My lawyer, discreet and sharp, called in a private investigator. A forensic accountant soon followed, their task to trace each dollar, every crooked ledger, every hidden thread of deceit. Together, step by step, they peeled away the polished mask Mary wore and revealed the rotting truth beneath that she had buried from sight. The first revelation froze me. Mary had been married before, not long ago, and she had a son, a boy of 6, living proof of a life she denied. The divorce papers had been rushed through, finalized only months before she set her sights on Jack. She had hidden it all completely, never whispering a word to my son, never daring to let our family glimpse that past. Then came the second twist, even sharper than the first. The wedding planner she insisted upon, the one billing us with extravagant sums, was not a true company at all but a shell. Its registered owner was her ex-husband, the man she swore was behind her. The receipts revealed inflated charges, marked up by 40%, money siphoned off through layers of deception too clever for amateurs. And the final blow was the most bitter of all. There was proof of her continuing contact with the same man, messages carrying more than the tone of business, photos exchanged in secrecy, notes scribbled with affection, profits divided between them. She had never cut him off. The love she paraded for Jack was nothing but a costume, a careful disguise for an elaborate scheme that bound her heart and her greed to another man. I knew I could not simply expose Mary. I had to prepare a counterstrike sharp enough to cut through every one of her schemes. With my lawyer's help, the first safeguard was confirmed. The mansion was never a direct wedding gift. Buried within the Dynasty Trust was a clause that made transfer conditional. Only after 5 years of proven, stable marriage could the property ever pass to Jack, and even then, it required my written approval. What Mary thought was already hers was, in truth, locked far beyond her reach. Next came the wedding budget. The $10 million she had dreamed of parading through floral arches and crystal chandeliers was no longer free to touch. We placed it into an escrow account, frozen until every receipt and contract could withstand scrutiny. No transparency, no release. The lavish fantasy she was selling to my son had been turned into a trap she could not escape. And then, the final nail. The forensic accountant uncovered a letter from the IRS, proof that Mary's family was already under investigation for unpaid taxes and suspicious filings. The letter sat in my drawer, a quiet weapon waiting for the right moment. I kept my silence, sipping my wine, nodding politely at her every false smile. But inside I felt the balance shift. I was no longer cornered. I was waiting, armed with truths sharper than any blade. On the day of my son Jack's wedding to Mary, the grand ballroom of the seaside hotel shimmered with crystal chandeliers and golden light, every detail arranged to impress, every corner blooming with roses and anticipation. The ballroom glittered with golden light as the master of ceremonies raised his hand, preparing to announce the grand gift that everyone had been whispering about all night. Guests leaned forward, glasses lifted, eager for the moment when the $30 million mansion would be proclaimed as the crown jewel of the evening. But before the words could leave his lips, I rose from my seat. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked to the stage, every eye turning toward me. I took the microphone with steady hands and spoke, my voice clear and cutting through the silence. I am sorry, ladies and gentlemen, the mansion has never been a wedding gift, and the $10 million budget has been frozen due to fraud. I will not finance a woman who has called me an expired ATM. Gasps rippled through the crowd, wine glasses paused midair, and Jack's face drained of color. My lawyer stepped forward, carrying folders thick with evidence. He opened them one by one, the truth laid bare in front of family and strangers alike. First, proof of Mary's former marriage and her 6-year-old child, concealed from Jack and hidden from all of us. Second, documents tying the wedding planner directly to her ex-husband, a shell company designed to inflate bills by 40%. And third, evidence of a suspiciously rushed divorce, raising the specter of marriage fraud. The ballroom that once buzzed with music now held only whispers of disbelief. Then the police arrived, exactly as planned. They approached the head table and lifted the bottle Mary had insisted was meant for me. Tests revealed what I had already feared: a dangerously high dose of benzodiazepine mixed with cardiac medication. Combined with wine, it could cause respiratory failure and arrhythmia, a silent death disguised as a natural collapse. What began as greed now stood revealed as a calculated crime. Murmurs turned to outrage, the guests recoiling as Mary's mask began to crack. The final blow came with a video projected onto the ballroom screen. Mary and her mother's voices filled the air, discussing how they would divide the mansion's value once it was sold. Laughter in the recording turned to screams in the hall as the weight of their betrayal settled on every guest. The manager of the venue, citing the morals clause in their contract, cut the music and took the microphone. "This event is canceled. Please vacate the hall." The spotlight turned, illuminating Mary where she stood trembling in her gown. Tears streaked her makeup as she begged Jack to believe her, but security stepped forward. In front of hundreds of horrified witnesses, she was escorted out, her sobs echoing beneath the chandeliers. And in that silence I stood steady, the mother they thought would fall, watching as the empire Mary tried to steal collapsed around her. The fallout was immediate. As the evidence spread across the ballroom like shattered glass, every secret Mary had tried to bury rose into the light. Her hidden marriage, her child, the fraudulent wedding planner, even the poisoned wine, all laid bare in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. The gasps of the guests turned to whispers, the whispers to harsh stares. I watched as once friendly hands withdrew, as smiles that had greeted her earlier now twisted into contempt. Her relatives lowered their eyes, unwilling to be associated with her shame. Friends who once courted her favor slipped quietly toward the exits. The society women who had praised her gown only hours before now whispered the word fraud as they passed. Mary's mother fared no better. Her voice, captured in the video plotting the sale of the mansion, sealed her fate. The two of them, who once preened among the wealthy, were suddenly stripped bare, their ambitions exposed as nothing more than greed and deception. The network of connections they had used to climb now unraveled thread by thread. No one wanted to be seen at their side. The higher they had tried to climb, the farther they fell. I sat still, watching the collapse. There was no need for me to speak further. Their ruin was complete, and it had unfolded before the eyes of every guest. By the next morning, the story had left the ballroom and spread across the country like wildfire. Headlines screamed from every newsstand. Wedding of the century turns to scandal. Bride tried to poison mother-in-law for $30 million mansion. Television anchors dissected every detail, showing clips of the police carrying away the bottle of wine, replaying the grainy video of Mary and her mother plotting their scheme. Social media erupted, hashtags trending as strangers debated greed, betrayal, and justice. Overnight, Mary's carefully constructed image of elegance shattered into a national joke. The most striking image circulated everywhere. Mary in her lavish white gown, mascara streaked down her cheeks, being escorted out of the ballroom by security. The once radiant bride now looked like a criminal caught mid-performance. That photo graced the front page of every major newspaper, splashed across digital feeds, impossible to escape. Her name became synonymous with deception, her family's reputation dragged through the mud. Even the magazines that had once celebrated her style and beauty turned against her, their covers mocking her downfall with biting captions. The family, once eager to flaunt their place in high society, now became symbols of disgrace. In the span of a single night, Mary's dream of grandeur had turned into a cautionary tale for the entire nation. Jack sat in silence long after the ballroom had emptied, his hands trembling as if the weight of the night pressed directly on his shoulders. I watched him, the boy I had raised now a man broken by betrayal. At last he lifted his eyes to me, red with shame. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I thought she loved me, and all this time she was using me." His head dropped into his hands, and the sob that escaped him was raw, the sound of innocence shattering. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not with triumph but with sorrow. He clutched my fingers as if anchoring himself to the truth he had tried so hard to deny. "I almost destroyed everything," he said, his words muffled. "I let her come between us. I let her make me doubt you. Please forgive me." The boy who once trusted too easily was now a man confronting the cost of his blindness. In that moment, the distance Mary had forced between us vanished. Jack leaned against me, not as a child, but as a son who finally understood where loyalty belonged. My heart ached for his pain, yet I felt a quiet strength return. He was no longer lost in illusion. He was standing with me again. In the weeks that followed, the full weight of consequence came crashing down on Mary's family. The IRS investigation that had once lingered quietly in the background now surged into the spotlight. Auditors uncovered years of unpaid taxes, suspicious filings, and hidden accounts that unraveled like a skein of tangled thread. Lawsuits surfaced from creditors demanding repayment, and whispers of fraud turned into formal charges. The same relatives and acquaintances who had once paraded beside them now kept their distance, unwilling to be tainted by scandal. Reporters camped outside their gated home, cameras flashing as boxes of documents were carried out for evidence. Mary's father avoided the press, his face gray with humiliation, while her mother's shrill protests only fueled the tabloids further. Invitations that once arrived daily vanished overnight. What had been a family striving for recognition among the elite became a cautionary tale splashed across every headline. Their wealth, once a shield, became a noose tightening around their own necks. From my vantage point, I did not celebrate but observed with a grim understanding. Greed had written their downfall long before I ever lifted a hand. They thought a single wedding night could transform them into royalty, but instead it revealed every crack they had tried to conceal. I lifted my glass one evening and let the truth settle in my heart. The greedy believe they can change their lives in a single night, but in that very night they lost everything. That is the price of deception and betrayal. The waves rolled gently against the shore as I stepped out onto the balcony of the $30 million mansion, the salt air brushing against my face. The silk navy robe draped around my shoulders caught the breeze, its folds moving like whispers of the ocean itself. I lifted a glass of red wine, its dark surface catching the fire of the setting sun. The horizon stretched endlessly before me, painted in hues of gold and crimson, and for the first time in months, the silence felt like a gift. The storm had passed, the chaos behind me, leaving only this stillness. I breathed it in, letting the calm settle deep in my bones. My reflection in the glass door was steady, no longer the fragile widow so many had underestimated. My voice rose within me, measured and sure. They called me an expired ATM. But age is not useless. Age is wisdom. Age is choice. I saved my son from a marriage built on lies, from a woman who would have destroyed him for wealth. Yet even as I stood victorious, the question lingered like the tide against the rocks. Does justice always bring happiness? Or does it leave another emptiness in its place? If this story touched you, share it. Let it remind you that dignity and self-respect are sometimes more valuable than money. And never forget, clarity of mind in every circumstance is the most precious legacy we leave for the generations to come.